Today's webinar unveils the results of the 2020 IT Services Report, which was conducted by researchcorp.org and sponsored by NetGain Technologies. My name is Megan Reed, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing at NetGain Technologies. Joining me today is Deuce Tao, NetGain's Virtual Chief Information Officer. He has over 25 years of professional experience in the IT industry. Deuce, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Megan, thank you. I hope everything's well and safe with everybody and their families. Maybe we can use this as a breath of fresh air from the new normal we find ourselves in, right? Thanks again for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
That's right, thank you. The Research Corp 2020 IT Services Annual Executive Report was sponsored by NetGain Technologies and is based on research across business leaders regarding their technology infrastructure, management, and challenges. The data comprises responses from 108 organizations with up to 1,000 employees across all industry types. Today, we will review and discuss the top 2020 priorities with a focus on IT security, operational workflow changes, professional and managed services usage, and some recommendations and predictions from our panel expert. So as I mentioned, the webinar is going to be interactive, and we'd like to get started with our first polling question. What is your single most pressing IT challenge? You should see that question on your screen now. Please select from the options and hit submit. While we give people a chance to respond, Deuce, what seems to be your client's biggest challenge?
Yeah, looking at the options here, I think that lowering IT costs is probably always top of the list, especially for a stakeholder who's responsible for a budget, right? Setting that aside, I think for us, it's always been security, right? I think we knew that 2019 was a budget-heavy year with Windows 2008 and Windows 7 ending support. A lot of migrations, upgrades going on. I think that we felt that hackers would probably wait to deliver payload until after that, right, for a better success rate. So we knew that threat was coming. Today's climate probably exacerbates things. So yeah, 2020 I think is all about security for us.
Well, let's take a look at the results. Interesting. So security comes in at 17%, and actually the lowering IT expenditures, increasing operational efficiency, and upgrading legacy systems come in at 25 and 33%. So that is very interesting results. Let's take a look at how that compares to our research. So when respondents were asked for their organization's top 3 IT priorities, it's no surprise that in today's ever-changing threat landscape, security is the top of the list, with 30% claiming it as their #1 priority, which actually differs a little bit from what we just saw. But following security is new technology implementation, improve operational efficiency, and reduce cost. This seems to align with kind of what you were thinking, Deuce.
Yeah, I think that upgrading legacy systems was a 2019 initiative, right? So if you waited until January, you probably didn't protect yourself from the unknown unknowns of a project, right? Probably rushed to get it done. So, reducing costs, operational workflow, I think all of those are constant. So it reconciles for me.
Great. So let's jump into security. The threat landscape in which businesses operate today is concerning. No organization is immune, and all are constantly seeking better security solutions to minimize their risk. The biggest threat lies with a company's most valuable asset, their employees. At a luncheon I attended last month, the president of an organization shared their story of being taken for about $15,000. A request came in to an employee from someone posing as their president, and that employee transferred those funds. The employee thought that they were responding promptly to the so-called president's request, only it wasn't a request from that president. Interestingly enough, I heard the exact same, very similar story the next day, and they were both marketing companies.
Yeah, I look back, Kevin Mitnick, right, the world's most famous hacker, right? He wrote The Art of Deception, the book, right, 20 years ago. That was basically an autobiography on how he could sweet talk his way around security protocols. We're talking multi-billion-dollar businesses, right? That was back in the 90s. So I don't think that these attack vectors are new. I think that, it's just becoming more prevalent because today's businesses, if we're going to be even remotely competitive, we have to leverage technology more, right? I know a mentor of mine here recently, he's at a helm of a pretty sizable financial institution. He said that 20 years ago, he thought he was going into the finance business, but the fact is, he's in the technology business today, right? He's not wrong. I think the hacker playbook is probably well defined, and I think businesses were trying to get our first good draft. Hackers just have a head start on us.
Yeah, they definitely do. And interestingly enough, one of our participants on the webinar today actually said they got taken in a similar scam for about $2,000. So it's very, very prevalent out there. And when we look at the security attack vector concerns, as in 2019, the leading 2020 involve ransomware and malware that can easily penetrate an organization's defenses via employee technology usage, in particular via email and web browsing. Concern over these attacks through email has diminished slightly from our 2019 figures. Do you believe that's because more and more organizations are implementing ongoing employee training to prevent this avenue of attack?
I hope so. I mean, I think so, right? I mean, we're talking about data in a survey that was completed earlier this year, right? We're talking pre-March 2020. So we weren't in the remote working environment that we certainly find ourselves in today and potentially into the future. So, I mean, around the second week of March, I started seeing about a 600% uptick in the number of attacks on my personal client portfolio. So, I mean, some of those attacks were poorly executed. You could spot them a mile away, but some of them weren't, right? Some of them were pretty sophisticated. So, I mean, since this whole pandemic thing, I think we live in a very different world from a business operations perspective. I think governments at every level, they kind of forced businesses into these implement work from home strategies, right, in a really short time frame. And a lot of them didn't have the technology or even the plan for that matter to really make that shift in like 24 hours in some cases, right? Now, I'm not saying that, the government policy was right or wrong. I'm just saying that those policies in that amount of time absolutely had an impact to IT, right? So in IT, when you try to implement technology rapidly with very little planning, I think we can agree that, I mean, at best, it's not going to be smooth, and at worst, you've opened up yourself to some significant vulnerabilities from a business perspective, right?
Yeah, and I'm surprised. I'm shocked at the 600% uptick in cyber attacks that you mentioned. That's a lot. When we flip over and we asked who was responsible for corporate security, there wasn't much change from 2019 to 2020 in the percentage that employs a chief security officer, despite the expanding security threat landscape. But when you look at the party responsible for corporate security, the IT manager typically takes the burden in many cases, followed by the CIO. Is this what you're seeing in the market?
Uh, you know, I mean, how many companies do you know under 100 employees that actually has a dedicated full-time chief information officer and a chief security officer with nothing on their plate but strategy, right? I mean, not a lot. I mean, this is it's a budget problem. Payroll being the largest expense, businesses can't afford that higher income headcount plus keeping the lights on. And I think when we think that small to medium-sized businesses make up of the majority of the businesses in our country, I think that's kind of the combination that we're seeing in this data that's being reflected. Now, the reason you want to separate those roles is so they can get the proper focus, right? I think strategy really should be handled by experienced strategists, right, who aren't distracted by help desk. I mean, we're talking about like somebody that didn't click the right button for the 15th time this week, right? I mean, productivity is obviously important to the business, but that issue should be getting handled by help desk where it belongs and shouldn't be a distraction to the development of your strategic roadmap. I mean, that's the roadmap that's going to protect your business from today's threats. I think a proper workflow and delegation of roles, that's what's going to keep you competitive and efficient, right? And I think if we take a look at the next couple of slides, we'll kind of see that reflection here. So based on the research, anywhere from 25-30% of the respondents had no documentation whatsoever, right? Now, I know IT engineers, we didn't get into the field to do documentation. I tell you, it's probably one of the most common gaps that we see within the clients that I run across. So, current user accounts, passwords, accurate inventories and hardware and software inventories and network diagrams, right? This is all asset management and inventory, right? But the real skeleton in the closet is this type of operational documentation. I think here's some examples of those, right? On the left side, network security policies. That's going to tell your staff how to safely use the technology assets that you give them, giving them a playbook on what's going to make them and then your business successful. On the right side, the security breach documentation is going to define what constitutes a breach, What are the action items after that? How do you communicate internally, externally? What do you tell the media, right? Um, I think these are the kind of pieces that aren't seen as critical to the business until there's a breach and all of a sudden you're doing some Monday morning quarterbacking. The next slide, I think you're going to see much the same, right? So the risk governance plan. This is where you're documenting all the risks of the business, you're pricing out your options, you're deciding what you're going to do, if anything at all, right? Um, on the right side, business continuity disaster recovery plan. I think most people get the gist of what these are. They are two separate different things, right? But one thing to note, right? Make sure that if you have these, make sure that you've met with your management team on a Saturday in the parking lot and said, okay, gang, it's Monday morning at 7:30, building's on fire. What do we do, right? If that's not happened, I can tell you that's not going to go well, right? And if you've never tested technology, um, something's not going to work, right? I mean, I've seen that. And that's a common gap that I'm seeing today. Um, so for the people that have nothing at all, man, I hope you don't have to deal with it, right? It's a tough thing to get through when you're trying to plan and execute at the same time with the emotions and all that going on. But I think all of this kind of helps support the need to have the responsibility separated and delegated out, right? In my experience, I think IT people are really proud. They're very hard and they're dedicated to you, but they can't close all the gaps on their own. And you don't want that support to be Google, right? Um, Take a look at the options out there. I think you might be pleasantly surprised at what you can find.
Yeah, thank you. And those plans are critical for businesses of all industries and sizes. Next, survey respondents were asked about their mobile device strategy and policies. The 2020 research data shows a year-over-year growth rate of 28% for organizations that have instituted mobile device policies for both company-provided devices and bring your own devices. And working with many organizations across multiple industries, what are your clients doing when it comes to a mobile device strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit different across the board. So I think people underestimate the importance of mobile device management in the smallest of environments, right? I have very large clients that want to have their entire operations personnel to be able to run their entire day to day from a mobile device. That's a pretty big wish, right? And it also has a pretty high requirement for mobile device management. Um, but I think everybody has some amount of data on a mobile device, right? Email is a great example. Sometimes it's overlooked. I think that we need to start seeing and treating mobile devices the way we would treat a key to the front door of the building, right? I mean, this is the world we live in. If it's compromised, then whoever has that is in. Remote wipe is a great first step. Most of the time, it's already available. Whatever solution you've already got, no additional cost. You just need to configure it up. I would just suggest that if you implement a remote wipe policy, right, make sure your end users are aware. There have been cases of people losing their only baby pictures because they left the company and weren't aware they would have their device wiped. So just give them a heads up.
Yeah, plan and communicating that plan to your employees is very, very important. I know I wouldn't be very happy if my phone was wiped and I didn't have my kids' pictures anymore. So this brings us to our next polling question. We'd like to know from the audience, which of the following security measures does your organization have in place today? Can you elaborate on AI endpoint protection?
Yeah, so I'm not going to get all bits and bytes and in the weeds on everybody here. I know this is an executive delivery. So traditional antivirus depends on somebody somewhere getting infected, right? It's called a zero-day attack, and then we take that information that after we study it and we define some variables that we can apply out in the world to protect everybody else, right? But the problem here, somebody's got to be the first one, right? So there are solutions out there that don't rely solely on just definitions, right? I mean, these are the solutions that use machine learning. They're using it at the laptop, desktop, and server level to understand really how the machine behaves. It'll detect when the machine isn't behaving normally or your interaction with it isn't, and it locks it down. So I would tell you, if you're concerned about like ransomware, crypto locker, that kind of thing, take a look at it. It absolutely works.
Yeah, so let's take a look at those results. Nice. Multi-factor authentication coming in at a very high level at 86%, followed by end user security training and a managed patching solution at 71%. So very, very nice. Very interesting results there.
Yeah, so just kind of keep in mind, guys, right? Security is a layer cake, right? Now, I'm really encouraged to see those results, right? There's no one silver bullet for security. The more hoops you can put in between you and the bad guys, right, the better off we are, right? And look, for those of you that don't have that end user security training, people are the weakest link. End user training solutions is probably the biggest bang for the buck you've got from a security perspective right now. Your people are working in new environment. They're full of distractions. Everybody is worried about their family's health, right? We're probably using new technology, new operational workflows. All communication is unusual right now. So it's a lot easier for your people to be socially engineered than ever before. And look, I get it, right? Well, we keep talking about solution, 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 right? This year was supposed to be a lighter budget year than that last, right? Revenue's taking a hit right now on top of that, but we are where we are, right? I think we got to look at some of the cost-effective solutions and close as many of those gaps as we can, um, keeping in mind that these risks that we're in today, they don't go away when things come back to normal, right?
And security is definitely a complex topic. Now we'd like to transition to the next portion of the research around IT platforms and tools. A company's most precious resource is their employees who require the right technology tools to be the most productive.
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about operational workflow, right, I think we're seeing history being made right now in business, right? Some traditionalists, right, bodies and seats guys, right, have no choice really but to kind of go to this distributed workforce if they're wanting to continue to do business right now, right? Uh, Business operations is probably forever changed now that we've gotten through the pain of this shift, right? So the first time a lot of people are beginning to see the benefits of leveraging technologies to be more efficient and flexible and connected, right? I think we see probably more focus of that in 2020. And let's not overlook the opportunity aspect, right? If your team works remotely, some of you guys on the call, if you're in a services business, are probably beginning to see that it really doesn't matter if your client's two doors down or in a completely different time zone, right? Potentially, your prospects may have just grew significantly.
That's right, and servicing those clients from anywhere relies heavily on the technology and the access to it. Organizations are increasingly reviewing from an availability, operational efficiency, and security perspective which applications are best on premise and which ones should be available in the cloud. Interestingly, based on the results of the survey, there is a substantial 2020 year over year growth rate of about 44% in hybrid environment operations. What's driving that increase in your opinion?
Yeah, that I would predict that. So I think that moving to the cloud makes a lot of business sense from a business continuity and a disaster recovery perspective, right? It makes it so much easier to execute on those plans. Um, from a cost perspective, I don't think you're going to see a big change on your income statement for moving to a cloud, but maybe if you're reducing headcount, man, maybe taking that train, right? But I think we've got to focus on the value add that technology really brings to the organization, right? I think IT should be enabling operations to generate revenue. It does provide a bit of risk prevention and insurance, of course, but I think both of those initiatives are delivered when you move to the cloud. Cloud's a term that's kind of thrown around a lot. And there's a lot of products, now being hosted over the internet. I think you've got to have a clear understanding of why you're going to the cloud before you go there. Understand the gotchas and the variables. Just because somebody moved their entire infrastructure to the cloud doesn't mean that you should or even that you could.
Yeah, that's true. Everyone's situation is different and needs to be reviewed on a case by case basis. Next, the survey respondents were asked about their unified communications strategy plan. It's clearly a must have for organizations of all sizes, as evidenced by this year's increase in the percentage of companies evaluating a strategy. Unified communications and collaboration is kind of a broad term. Can you explain it just quickly and then how organizations should begin developing their strategy?
Yeah, sure. So unified communication collaboration, it's pretty straightforward, right? It's how you communicate internally and externally. whether it's voice, text, email, instant messaging, all of that can be converged into a single solution, or you can have like multiple solutions that you integrate together to move from one method to another, right? You can be in an instant message and see if somebody's on the phone, or in a meeting. You could start a meeting from one or the other. Um, as far as when you get the strategy going, before you need it, right? Many businesses, I think, were kind of rushed into this work from home thing, and ultimately they just used whatever they could use tomorrow. Great example is the Zoom breach, right? I think it's pretty publicized. My opinion, I think that breach was probably a failure of planning, training, and execution, more than it was, I think, a vulnerability of the technology. My opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, with any of those tools, proper training is definitely going to be required. So Next Research Corp gathered a lot of data from a unified communications and collaboration standpoint. So I'm just going to breeze through some of the high points on this. From a voice over IP perspective, Cisco and Microsoft saw the largest 2020 gains. Mitel ShoreTel experienced a substantial decline along with Avaya. The overall vendor preference ranking order remained the same. In the web collaboration category, Cisco WebEx pulled 13% ahead of Microsoft Skype for Business in 2020, and free Skype usage increased dramatically by nearly 14%. Microsoft is the undisputed leader in the instant messaging and presence category, with Skype for Business or Link and Microsoft Teams representing a combined 76% usage share in 2020. And when asked about persistent group chat, our 2020 research shows negligible change year over year. However, video conferencing usage has increased 14% from 2019, a year-over-year growth rate of a substantial 26%. These statistics are interesting, and now with many organizations, workforces working from home, these numbers may look a little bit different even today. From engagements with your clients, Deuce, what major benefits are they experiencing from these types of tools?
You know, I think that I'm going to show my age here, right? I can remember some cell phones didn't have the internet, right? And so I also remember how all of a sudden having the internet like in the palm of my hand 24/7, right, it impacted my personal productivity. So I'm not trying to suggest that, collaboration tool is going to have that size of an impact on your business, but I believe there will be an impact, right? I think that we really don't know what efficiencies we're missing out on until we've used something, but used it to the point where we're comfortable with it, right? I think we're going to start seeing a little bit of that now.
Yeah, I agree. Now we'd like to flip to another polling question and find out from the audience which collaboration tools are used in your organization. The options are on your screen, and please hit submit when you are finished. What tools and platforms are you seeing as prevalent in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think it's whatever works for them, right? I'm not a like a vendor kind of, oh, this is the one you've got to go with, right? I think it's got to make sense for the business. So a lot of what we've already talked about. I mean, there's Teams, SharePoint, you got Jabber out there. I personally know people who are hosting private like Zoom parties, right, from video conference perspective today, just to keep in touch with family and friends. I think it's a little bit all over the board. What works for them is what they should be using.
Yeah, let's see how the results came in. So it looks like, wow, 100% using video conferencing, 75% using voice over IP, and 50% using some chat, and 63 using instant messaging. And interestingly, no one's currently in the evaluation process. So that I'm not really surprised, I guess, by that 100% of video conferencing, knowing kind of the situation that we're in today. But very, very nice results there.
Yeah, welcome to today's world, right?
Yeah. So now let's take a look at how businesses are handling non-core functions within their organization. Matching the 2019 survey data, 97% of the 2020 survey respondents' organizations reap the benefits of outsourcing some or all of their non-core business functions. You'll see IT ranks fourth with 41.34% of respondents engaging an expert IT services partner. When Research Corp drilled down on IT partnership engagements, the results were interesting. 76% of organizations engage in some form of third-party IT partnership.
Yeah, and that's what I would have expected too, right? Look, I know I exhausted everybody early on with that kind of that discussion of the separation of roles, but I think this illustrates how you accomplish that goal at a minimal cost, right? Um, Small businesses don't have, not a lot of us have the luxury of an endless budget, right? So we're not in the business as a hobby, right? I think the bottom line, it's got to be the black to the point where it makes sense to continue to doing business, right? I think that this is how we can make that happen and reconcile budget to separating of those roles. The hard part's going to be choosing the right partner, right?
Yeah, and when we look across the 76% of organizations using IT services per partners, we find a wide range of IT services engagement types. There was a 23% year-over-year growth rate for network infrastructure installation, setup, and training. Similarly, there has been a 13% year-over-year growth rate of organizations using providers to manage and maintain their network infrastructure on an ongoing basis. One of the biggest increases we saw was the 55% jump for security equipment system installation and setup, and about 52% who are using IT services providers for ongoing managed security services. I suspect that doesn't surprise you, does it?
It doesn't, right? Yeah, look, I've got a vested interest in keeping everything under one roof, right? If a client that I have goes with a third-party integrator, more times than not, that integrator does a lot of guessing. I think it opens up the opportunity for a lot of finger pointing. So I do have a vested interest in trying to keep that in. I don't think it's very rare when everybody wins in that situation. Usually when that stuff breaks, we're typically on the hook to fix it. And many times that recommendation from us is, hey, we need to align it with best practices and align it with what we see actually work in like environments like yours, right? Um, which is probably an additional cost, right? And nobody wants that situation. I think that sort of thing just ends up costing more to a business than the difference in the original pricing, right? Um, I would prefer to just talk about what you need as a business. Let's get some options together, make a decision on how we want to move forward, and I would like to keep it with a team that knows you best and has their arms in your environment on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's right. And as you've experienced yourself, those clients who want a true partnership between themselves and their IT services provider, they typically win together. And interestingly, the IT service provider selection criteria, about 60% are looking for that single IT services provider if that's available. About 34% are looking for multiple IT services providers just to kind of leverage that best in class across the group. But when we flip it over and we look at rationale, there's no surprise organizations choose to work with a third party provider because it's critical to their business needs and growth. It allows them to focus on their core business and it enhances service quality. Interestingly, cost reduction is not a major factor in the rationale. Are you surprised by that?
Not really, right? I mean, I know we saw earlier in our poll that everybody was looking for operational efficiencies, which can be tied to cost reduction, right? But um, I think we've got to be focused on the value add, right? And that's what we talked about before. I think the value that you get and the efficiencies you get with going with a mature services provider, a world-class one, right? I think it's exponential. You've got your redundancy in personnel, you've got a deep bench. Ideally, your IT operational efficiencies is already baked in. I think that a world-class managed services provider that's been in business for, I don't know, 20, 35 years or whatever, I think you get the benefits of their mistakes. So these are the kind of things that you don't realize are important until you're 10 years down the road, and then you realize how many resources you've wasted, right? That these partners that have been in business for that long, they've already realized that, right? So I think doing your homework, asking for references, that's going to be critical in choosing the right partner.
Yeah, I agree that references are definitely key when selecting a partner. Let's see how our audience's strategy compares to the research report statistics. What capacity, if any, does your organization partner for IT services? While we give them time to answer, any final thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, so I mean, from a partnership perspective, I mean, just a thought on like how I see my best relationships work. I think from a trust perspective, I am no different than a doctor, lawyer, financial fiduciary, right? I think that my clients understand that I want their business to succeed, not just put some really cool stuff in their server room because like a magazine said it or an internet forum told me that I should. I think you got to build a relationship, a true business relationship, um, with somebody who's really putting your business goals first, right? I think that a world-class IT services organization should be able to deliver on that side of the relationship equation, and they should have the talent to really execute the plan, and do it with minimal impact to the business and budget.
Yeah, let's see how those results came in. So it looks like nice, about 70% for both projects and managed services, which pretty much affirms the broader research data saying that, 76% of organizations use technology partners. And interestingly, about 10% came in that's saying that they're doing everything in-house and 20% just using it for some managed services. I am surprised though that 0% are on the category of for projects only. I guess majority of those are sitting in that 70% there. Does that surprise you, Deuce?
No, not at all. I think that's in line with what I see out in the marketplace.
You think so? Good. So before we jump into Q&A, I want to get some 2020 predictions from our expert here. But quickly, just as a reminder, we would love to answer any of the questions that you might have. So in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you should see that questions panel. Feel free to add any question, and we will get to that at the end of the webinar. Deuce, over to you on predictions.
Yeah, so I don't know about the expert thing. You talk to my wife, and she may she may tell you something completely different. Um, so the things that are top of my mind, though, AI and machine learning. I think that's kind of always been on the growth radar. So is cloud solutions, right? So I think that's always been out there. We touched on a couple of those things today. From a security perspective, we saw some of this, but multi-factor authentication, anything publicly facing needs to have multi-factor authentication. End user security awareness training, I think we saw that's going to be key, closing up that weakest link. An endpoint protection solution, a good one, right? I mean, these are really the greatest security threats to your business from my perspective. Um, Business continuity, disaster recovery planning is another one. I think a lot of those plans are going to be revisited now that we've had to do these distributed workforces, if we haven't already. But I think probably my final thought is that we've heard this before on news channels that business is actively changing. I think this pandemic has probably made operational shift just a part of life. Um, you know, the quote is that necessity is the mother of invention, right? I think we're going to see some of the things that we talk about today probably become much more common.
Yes, and now we're going to go ahead and open the floor for questions. So we do want to respect everyone's time. If we don't get to your question, we'll follow up with you individually afterwards. But let's see on our question side. Okay, so our first question, what does cloud really mean?
Oh yeah, I probably should have expanded on that. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so the cloud is nothing more than something being hosted somewhere that's accessible through the internet. That's it. You can move your email from being hosted inside your building to Microsoft's cloud where you access the internet. You can have your backup data replicated to like an online storage facility. You could move your servers to like Amazon or Microsoft to be accessible through a private and secure internet circuit. So that's what cloud means.
Nice. On to our second question. There are a lot of backup options out there. Which backup do you think is best?
Oh gosh, best, right? Okay, so you're probably not going to like this answer, okay? And I do not intend to sidestep it, but um, my job is to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear, right? So the truth is, it really depends on your situation, right? Keep in mind, backup and disaster recovery are two very different things. When we talk about backup, we're talking that we've got your data somewhere and we can get to it sometime. When we talk about disaster recovery, uh, that's a different thing, right? We're defining how quickly you can get you back up and running after disaster. We call that recovery time objective, and how current the data needs to be when we get you back up and running. We call that recovery point objective. Those two things, recovery point and recovery time objectives, first, it should be well defined in a disaster recovery plan. Everything starts with your expectations. And those expectations is really what should be building the documentation. So um, backup and DR being two very different things. Now, if you follow best practices, you need to have your backup and DR sites, I would say, at least an hour's drive away from wherever the primary site is. That's going to help cover you from a tornado and earthquake perspective, right? Hopefully it doesn't hit the other side. If you're if you're wanting to replicate your data to the cloud somewhere, and this is one of the gotchas we were talking about moving to the cloud, knowing why and knowing how, the amount of bandwidth you have, and or if you can even get more bandwidth, is going to define and refine that plan a little bit, right? Assuming you have virtualization from a server perspective, I personally like to see local backups of all those virtual servers so I can bring them online if there's an issue with software locally. And I also like to have those same images replicated to a secondary site so that if anything happens to the primary site, you can bring them up and everything's good, right? But then I also like to have that set of data in a ready to power on state um, somewhere in the cloud for disaster recovery purposes. So again, it's going to look very different depending on a lot of different variables. So, but start that with your expectations in a disaster recovery plan.
Great, thank you. Okay, it looks like our third question, what is the most common mistake that you see with you that your clients make?
Okay, so that's a tough one, right? So I'm not going to breach the trust and confidentiality, right? But I can tell you, and I think we touched on this a little bit before. I think that the most common thing that makes or breaks success within the business is viewing your IT team or your IT partner as somebody who's just interested in buying cool stuff. Okay. Um, Maybe they're just trying to sell you something. I know that there are a lot of those consultants out there. It's all they care about. So I do get it. But um, look, I mentioned earlier how this is a relationship. You got to be willing to take your shirt off if you want the doctor to help, right? Um, a good consultant should care about two things: your expectations for your business and your budget, period. Now, those two things are at complete opposite ends of a very large slide scale, right? I don't want to act like that you can have both, right? Especially if we don't get them aligned, we're going to have to adjust one or the other. If you've got $1 million expectation with a $20,000 budget, something's got to give. And I think that's where a lot of consultants slash IT managers get themselves in a bind. Um, Especially when they're dealing with the corner offices, right? They're a bit intimidated, right? But the relationship has to mean honesty and transparency. I think we've got to have real conversations about real problems in your business if you want to have real success. If you're looking for somebody to blame, and I've had those pass through my portfolio, like I just say, let's save the wasted time and the expense, right? I don't think you're going to get what you really need out of that relationship. Um, but I can tell you that I've been really lucky to work with clients that I'm working with now. Right, I think my clients know that I'm committed to the success of their business. Um, and because they approach that relationship knowing that we want the same thing, we've been very, very successful in placing IT as an asset to the organization. And we're not looking at it as just a revenue sink, right? And I think here we're back again at the hardest part of this, right? Choosing the right strategic partner. If there's just one guy that you have down the street and he's doing it part time, if they don't have any idea what a balance sheet is, an income statement is, or a cash flow statement is, they're probably not going to be able to maximize your profitability, right? And certainly not meet your expectations. So I think having that open discussion and building that relationship is probably the keystone there. Um, so there you go.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So it looks like we've gotten to a majority of our questions here. If you have any other questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to NetGain Technologies using the contact information on the screen. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would really, really appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. Also, an email with a link to view the recording of today's webinar will be provided to everyone. I'd like to thank our expert Deuce for your insights, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar reviewing the results of Research Corp's 2020 IT Services Annual Report. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, guys. Have a great one.